Welcome to History Unveiled, where hidden history comes back to light. Don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss another forbidden story. Charles City Courthouse, Virginia, July 1862. Confederate forces had just pushed Union troops back during the 7 Days battles. The courthouse became a strategic command point. Artillery still echoes in these walls, where generals made decisions that would cost thousands of lives. Spring 1863. Soldiers gather near Fredericksburg just before the second battle. Most of these young men had never fired a weapon before enlisting. Within weeks, this field would be soaked in blood. Some of these faces would never see home again. Confederate troops marched south on North Market Street in Frederick, Maryland. The townspeople watched in silence as thousands of rebel soldiers passed through. This invasion into Union territory would lead to the deadliest single day in American history at Antietam. But what happened next would change the entire course of the war. Outside Petersburg, Virginia, Union officers and enlisted men stand with the 13-inch dictator mortar. This massive weapon could hurl 200-pound shells over 2 miles. The siege of Petersburg would drag on for 9 brutal months, becoming a preview of World War I trench warfare. Matthew Brady, born around May 18, 1822. He became one of the earliest and most famous photographers in American history. Brady risked his life to document the Civil War, bringing the brutal reality of battle to Americans who had never seen combat. His images shocked a nation. Gettysburg, 1863. 5 dead bodies lie on the battlefield after the most crucial Union victory of the war. Over 3 days, 50,000 men were killed, wounded, or went missing. This photograph was one of the first times Americans saw the true cost of war. No glory, just death. General William Tecumseh Sherman, photographed by Brady's National Photographic Art Gallery in Washington. Sherman would become known for his brutal march to the sea, destroying everything in his path through Georgia. Total war, he called it. The South would never forget. Little did anyone know, one ordinary citizen would become an unexpected war hero. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. John L. Burns, the old hero of Gettysburg, poses with gun and crutches. At 72 years old, Burns grabbed his musket and joined Union troops during the battle. He was wounded 3 times, but survived. He became a living legend, visited by President Lincoln himself. An older woman sits at her desk, quill pen in hand, wearing a head covering and white shawl over a dark dress. While men fought on battlefields, women kept the country running. They managed farms, worked in factories, and wrote countless letters that kept hope alive. Brandy Station, winter of 1864. Camp scene at Army of the Potomac headquarters. Between battles, soldiers lived in these makeshift camps. They wrote letters, played cards, and tried to stay warm. The boredom between battles was almost as hard as the fighting itself. USS Miami, 1864 to 1865. Black crew members sew and relax on the forecastle, starboard side. Over 18,000 African Americans served in the Union Navy, about 15% of the total force. They faced discrimination even while fighting for freedom, earning less pay than white sailors. Meanwhile, a daring river crossing would test the limits of military ingenuity. Blanket boats ferry field artillery and soldiers across the Potomac River. When bridges were destroyed or unavailable, soldiers improvised. They stretched blankets over wooden frames to create makeshift rafts. One mistake, one tear in the fabric, and men and equipment would sink to the bottom. Gold miners in the Black Hills. The gold rushes that resulted from Custer's discoveries antagonized the Sioux Indians. This discovery would provoke the war in which Custer would lose his life at Little Bighorn. But that tragedy was still years away. 96th Pennsylvania Infantry at Camp Northumberland near Washington, around 1861. Infantry regiments like this formed the backbone of both armies. These men came from farms, factories, and city streets. Most had no military training. They would learn to fight, or they would die. A small caliber cannon, an infantry gun, displayed with personnel of the 96th Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment, 1861 to 1865. Artillery like this could tear through lines of advancing soldiers. The sound alone could drive men mad. Veterans would hear those explosions in their nightmares for decades. As the war finally ended, an unprecedented spectacle would unfold in the nation's capital, Washington. Mounted cavalry ride past the reviewing stand during the Grand Review of the Union Army. May 1865. The war was over. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers marched through the Capitol in victory. But the celebration was bittersweet. Lincoln was already dead, assassinated just weeks earlier. The Capitol building hangs with black crepe, flag at half-mast during the Grand Review. Spectators gather to watch the victorious army parade. The nation mourned Lincoln even as it celebrated victory. The man who saved the Union would never see the peace he fought for. Richmond, Virginia, 1865. Freedmen gather by the canal. Free men, women, and children photographed together for the first time as legally free people. The Confederacy's capital had fallen. 4 million enslaved people were now free. But freedom came without land, without money, without protection. Battle-torn regimental flag of the 76th Ohio Infantry Regiment. The flag shows the brutal combat this unit survived. Every tear, every burn mark, represents a battle where men fell. Flags like this were sacred. Soldiers died protecting them because they represented everything they fought for. History of the 9th Regiment, Connecticut Volunteer Infantry, known as the Irish Regiment. In the War of the Rebellion, 1861 to 1865, Irish immigrants joined by the thousands, fighting for a country that often discriminated against them. A Civil War battlefield hospital, photographed around the 1860s. Medicine was primitive. Doctors amputated limbs with saws, without anesthesia in many cases. More soldiers died from disease and infection than from bullets. The screams from these tents haunted those who heard them. Unidentified young soldier in Union uniform, photographed between 1861 and 1865. He looks barely old enough to shave. Thousands of boys lied about their age to enlist. Some were as young as 12 or 13. Many never made it home. Unidentified young African-American soldier in Union uniform. Nearly 200,000 black men served in the Union Army and Navy. They fought for their freedom and the freedom of millions still enslaved. They faced Confederate troops who often murdered black soldiers rather than take them prisoner. Abraham Lincoln at Cooper Union, 1860. This speech helped Lincoln win the presidency. He argued against the expansion of slavery with logic and moral clarity. Within a year, the nation would be at war. Within 5 years, he would be dead. 2 unidentified escaped slaves wearing ragged clothes. Photographed by McPherson and Oliver in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. These brave souls risked everything to reach Union lines. If caught, they faced torture, sailed deeper into the South. Dutch Gap, Virginia. Picket station of colored troops near the Dutch Gap Canal. African-American soldiers often received the most dangerous assignments. They were placed on picket duty in exposed positions. Atlanta, 1864. Barnard, the official government photographer, documented new Union fortifications under Captain O. M. Poe. He worked in a light-proof tent, preparing and developing his plates on the spot. His equipment traveled in a wagon. Every photograph required dangerous work near active battle zones. One stray shell could destroy everything. Battle of Nashville. Federal Outer Line, December 16, 1864. Union forces prepared their defensive positions as Confederate General Hood's army approached. This would become one of the most decisive Union victories of the war. Hood's army would be shattered, never to fight again as an effective force. Meanwhile, in the capital, a different kind of battlefield was saving lives. Armory Square Hospital, Washington. Wounded soldiers filled these wards by the thousands. Nurses worked around the clock. The smell of gangrene and death hung in the air. Poet Walt Whitman volunteered here, writing letters for soldiers too wounded to hold a pen. Many who survived battle died in these beds. Fort Battery Rogers, a 15-inch Rodman gun, the largest cannon mounted in the fort. This massive weapon could fire a 440-pound shell over 3 miles. The recoil alone could knock men off their feet. Defenses like this protected Washington from Confederate attack throughout the war. Old Union and Confederate veterans reunited at Gettysburg, shaking hands across the stone wall of the Bloody Angle. This is the spot where Pickett's charge suffered over 3,000 losses. Decades after the battle, former enemies met as old men. They embraced where they once tried to kill each other. Time healed some wounds, but the memories never faded. But one man's death would haunt the nation like no other. The actual photograph of Abraham Lincoln in his casket. His face shows the toll of war, the weight of impossible decisions. The nation's savior, murdered just days after victory. This image was one of the few taken before his burial. Most copies were later destroyed, considered too disturbing for public view. Lincoln's funeral train began its journey on April 21, 1865. It traveled through 7 states and 180 cities before reaching Springfield for burial on May 4th. His son Willie's coffin was also aboard. The procession included major stops like Baltimore and Harrisburg for public viewing. Millions lined the tracks to say goodbye. President Lincoln visiting the battlefield at Antietam, Maryland, October 3, 1862. General McClellan and 15 members of his staff stand with him. Just weeks earlier, this ground was soaked with blood. Over 22,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing in a single day. Lincoln walked among the graves, his face heavy with sorrow. North Anna River, Virginia. Union soldiers bathing in the river. Between battles, soldiers grabbed moments of normalcy. They washed away the dirt, the blood, the horror. For a few minutes, they could forget the war. But the guns always called them back. Officers of Companies A and B. 3rd Massachusetts Heavy Artillery, with the crew of a 100-pounder Parrott gun on iron barbette carriage at Fort Totten. Artillery crews worked in perfect coordination. One mistake and the gun could explode, killing everyone nearby. These men trusted each other with their lives. Soon, one man's rage would change history forever. Lewis Powell, also known as Lewis Payne, one of the conspirators in the Abraham Lincoln assassination. This photograph shows him confined on the USS Saugus. Powell attacked Secretary of State William Seward with a knife the same night Lincoln was shot. He was captured, tried, and hanged. His dead eyes in this photo show a man with no remorse. Michigan and Pennsylvania Relief Association. Ladies ministering to wounded and sick soldiers. Photographed by Taylor and Huntington. Women served as nurses, relief workers, and organizers. They brought comfort to dying men. They wrote final letters to families. They were the angels of the battlefield. Prisoners at camps like Andersonville and Elmira repeatedly attempted escapes by tunneling. Conditions were harsh and disease-ridden. At Elmira, over 10,000 prisoners were held. Conditions were so severe and escape attempts so frequent that artillery was positioned to guard the camp. Nearly 3,000 Confederate prisoners died there, almost a quarter of those held. City Point, Virginia, headquarters of the Secret Service. Spies and intelligence officers worked in the shadows of the war. They gathered information, broke codes, and ran agents behind enemy lines. This invisible war was just as important as the battles. Information saved thousands of lives. Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant standing by a tree in front of a tent. Cold Harbor, Virginia, June 1864. Just days earlier, Grant had ordered a disastrous assault that cost 7,000 Union casualties in less than an hour. He later wrote it was the only attack he regretted ordering, but he never stopped pressing forward. Bridge on the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, as repaired by Union Army engineers under Colonel Herman Haupt. Union engineers became masters at rapid bridge construction. Confederates would destroy a bridge, and Union engineers would rebuild it in days. This logistical superiority helped win the war. July 5, 1863. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Confederate dead lie gathered at the edge of Rose Woods, 2 days after the battle ended. Bodies wait for burial in the summer heat. Over 7,000 men died here in 3 days. This is what they didn't show in the newspapers. September 1862. Antietam, Maryland. Unburied bodies scatter across the field where they fell. The single bloodiest day in American history. 23,000 casualties in 12 hours. Photographers arrived while the dead still lay where they died. A contrast. Federal soldiers buried in marked graves. Confederate dead, left exposed to the elements. The victors controlled the narrative, even in death. Antietam's fields became America's first mass grave. But what photographers captured in the trenches would shock a nation unprepared for the truth of modern warfare. April 1865. Petersburg, Virginia. A Confederate soldier lies dead in the trenches. The siege lasted 9 months. Soldiers lived, fought, and died in these muddy ditches. This image, donated years later, shows the war's brutal final chapter. The Photographic History of the Civil War published these images in 1911, nearly 50 years after the battle. Even decades later, the images remain too disturbing for immediate release. Antietam's fields, frozen in time. Thousands of scenes photographed between 1861 and 1865. Most were locked away. The public demanded glory and heroism, not this. One photograph would become the most controversial image of the entire war. July 1863. Gettysburg, home of a rebel sharpshooter. This Confederate soldier died behind a stone barricade. Photographer Alexander Gardner staged the rifle and moved the body for dramatic effect. America's first manipulated war photograph. Summit of Barlow's Knoll, Gettysburg. Union soldiers fell here during the first day's fighting. The hill changed hands multiple times. By nightfall, the dead cover the slopes. A sharpshooter's last sleep. Gettysburg, July 1863. Another of Gardner's staged photographs. The same dead Confederate, repositioned again. The rifle placed carefully. The lie sold as truth for decades. September 1862. Burying the dead at Antietam. Burial details worked for weeks. Shallow graves dotted the fields. Many bodies were never identified. Soldiers buried where they fell, marked only by wooden boards. While death dominated the battlefields, a different story unfolded behind the lines. July 1861. Federal cavalry at Sudley Ford after First Bull Run. The war's first major battle. Union forces retreated in chaos. Photographers captured the aftermath, confused soldiers, abandoned equipment, the reality of defeat. September 14, 1862. The Battle of South Mountain, Maryland. 3 days before Antietam. Confederate forces made their stand in the mountain passes. The dead lay scattered across the rocks and ridges. June 3, 1864. The 7th New York Heavy Artillery charges at Cold Harbor. Operating as infantry now, not artillerymen. They advanced into withering fire. 7,000 Union casualties in less than an hour. Grant would later call it his greatest regret. Ground. 1864, Atlanta, Georgia. Soldiers sit atop boxcars at the railroad depot. In the background, the office of Atlanta's daily intelligencer newspaper. Sherman's army transformed the city into a military hub. 2 months later, he would burn it to the ground. Somewhere in the South, a black family enters Union lines, their possessions loaded onto a cart. Everything they owned balanced on 4 wheels. Freedom meant leaving everything behind, except what you could carry. An unidentified African-American soldier in Union uniform, photographed with his wife and 2 daughters. Nearly 200,000 black men served in the Union Army. Their families followed them to war, seeking protection behind federal lines. Camp Hamilton, Fortress Monroe, Virginia. Contraband camps housed thousands of escaped slaves. They called it Freedom Fort. Families lived in overcrowded conditions, waiting for the war to decide their fate. Atlanta, Georgia. The shell-damaged Ponder House. Artillery fire tore through civilian homes. Sherman's siege didn't discriminate between soldiers and citizens. The city became a battlefield, and everyone suffered. A Harper's cartoon depicting the Freedmen's Bureau, established in 1865 to help formerly enslaved people transition to freedom. The Bureau provided food, education, and legal assistance. It lasted only 7 years. The promises of Reconstruction would fade faster than the photograph. 1861, Queen's Farm, near Fort Slocum, Washington, D.C. A family lives in a tent alongside the 31st Pennsylvania Infantry. Wives, children, washerwomen, they followed the army. Tent cities stretched for miles. War wasn't just soldiers. It was entire communities on the move. Nashville, Tennessee. 2